Hello and welcome everyone to the Fill Up podcast today. And my name is Richard Haynes as your host. I'm excited to welcome the person that I consider as the brainchild to this concept of fill up, fall in love with the process. I heard it first from Mr. John Vander Giessen, who is our special guest today, and really looking forward to having a conversation with him and learning more about his story and sharing some of that with you. John, how are you?
I'm happy. How are you, Richard?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for
Good to be
asking.
here.
Yeah. So here we are, all these months later after um, that epic mic drop that you gave in one of Andrew's masterminds, where you shared some of your story and I don't know whether somebody asked you a question or it might have been like, what advice do you have for people to achieve success? Because you've achieved that success at some of the highest levels in sport, and you said you got to learn to fall in love with the process,
hmm
and that stuck with me ever since then. So thank you for that gift. Oh, however long ago that mastermind was.
Yeah, a little while ago now, but nonetheless, I mean, really every time that I step into a situation, whether it's a one-on-one conversation or speaking in front of a group, whenever you can get just even one person where they're like, you said one little sound bite, you said one concept, or you shared something as a past experience and story that really moved the needle for me, that it's incredibly gratifying. And so I was very pleased to hear that you were able to take an idea and run with it. So awesome work there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it is. It's incredible to lift other people, right? And
Yeah, it makes
from
life fun.
yeah, it does. It does. It is some of the funnest of life. And so, my hope here with this podcast episode today is that we do some of that for the five people who might listen to it, or maybe more than that, right? All of my kids, I'll have them sit down and listen to it, and that'll be five. So we'll get five in for sure.
Well, I'll
But
do the same with mine, and
oh,
we'll have a
yeah,
team.
then we're up there. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, John, I wonder if you wouldn't mind just I'll kind of let you roll with the mic for a bit here and just share your story because it's a pretty epic story of a young man from rural Idaho and what a human being can accomplish.
Yeah,
And
sure.
so just turn that over to you.
So I was fortunate enough to grow up in the 80s in rural Idaho and came from a farming family. And, my mom drove me into the town of Twin Falls, Idaho every day from preschool forward. And, just had a really great upbringing. And I would say that I didn't have a ton of direction, though. So when it came time to go to college, I looked around and I said, well, some of my friends were going up to the University of Idaho. Maybe I should do that. So I did that and really had no idea what I was doing or what I wanted to do, which I've learned is not a really great way to be successful uh, in life when you don't have a bearing on where you want to go. It's kind of like the uh, Alice in Wonderland quote, right?
Yeah.
Which way do you want to go? I don't know. Well, then it doesn't matter which way you take, right? So that was kind of a moment there for me. And when I got up to the University of Idaho, I didn't really do anything other than learn how to be social and get bad grades. But I was still learning about life, and I think that was really important. And then um, one of my friends said, "Hey, man, you want to do something like extracurricular?" I was like, "Yeah, what? I think I still got something left in the tank here. I kind of want to do something." And he said, "You should play rugby." So I said, "What's that?" I'd never heard of the word, didn't know it was a sport, not familiar with it in any stretch of the imagination. And so I went out to trainings on Tuesday and Thursday of that week, and then on that weekend played in a few games and did everything wrong and had a lot of penalties, and I also had a lot of fun. So I went back to the computer lab and did some research, found out that there was a Rugby World Cup, that it was an incredibly popular sport worldwide, and that in the 2003 World Cup, Australia was going to be the host nation. And I said, makes total sense to buy a one-way ticket and fly down there and
So how
walk on to the University of Queensland team.
Can I interrupt just for a sec to ask how old were you at this time? Like 18 or
Um, I was 20 years old, I believe. Yeah,
20
20.
years old? One way ticket to go to Queensland.
Yeah, well, I actually flew into Sydney, funny enough, which on a map is only about 2.5 inches away from where I needed to be, which was Brisbane. But it
Yeah.
turns out that that's the equivalent of flying into Miami and needing to be in New York. Uh, and this is before cell phones, right? I didn't have a cell phone. There was no Google Maps. There was no nothing. So, that's wonderful experiences and wonderful learnings, right, along the way on how to do things without the need of a phone.
Yeah.
So anyway, I walked onto that team and, was in the bottom rung of the more or less development team and just had a lot of fun and met so many great people. And interestingly enough, when I returned home months and months later and then finished up my degree at University of Idaho, I got an email from somebody who said, "Hey, John, this is Carter from Australia. I've moved to France and I've started to coach a men's club. Are you interested to come and play?" And so, without getting into a ton of details, I did ask a lot of questions to which he replied back, "Fly into Geneva. I'll collect you there." So he didn't answer really any of my questions. He just told me what city to fly into. And at that point in time in my life, with my knowledge of Europe, I thought, I'm pretty sure that Geneva is not even in France. So, it was kind of a leap of faith. And I went ahead and flew out there and met this guy that I didn't really quite know, but was friendly enough. And sure enough, did play for a men's club there. And, French rugby at the men's club level was a step up in regards to physicality. And, French men are very passionate guys that are not afraid to get into some dirty play or some fighting and whatnot. So for me as a young kid that had one season of basketball in high school, it was it was a good learning experience to be resilient and toughen up a little bit. So it was a lot of fun. And randomly, because I was willing to say yes a couple of times in this journey, somebody was on vacation from New Zealand that happened to be on a board of directors for a rugby province, the Hawke's Bay Rugby Union in New Zealand. And he saw me play and he came up and said, "Hey, we need to get you down to New Zealand and get you into more of a professional atmosphere." And at that point in time, I was supposed to go into the Peace Corps to finish up my university credits, and that was going to be in the Philippines for 27 months. And the French rugby thing was just a little bit of fun before I went in to finish that master's and do all that work in the Philippines. And I got that offer to go to New Zealand, and man, I thought really hard. And my sister said it best. She said, "John, you can do the Peace Corps when you're 50 years old, but I don't think that you can play rugby at that point in time," which I just had my 42nd birthday yesterday. So I'm only 8 years away from 50. And she's right. I certainly couldn't play rugby at that level now, but I could definitely step into the Peace Corps today. So,
How
so
much is your sister, older or younger than you? The one
she's
that you
27 months older than me, and she is just such a guiding light and a wonderful, wonderful person. She always comes in with those little sage bits for me to
That's awesome.
shift my perspective. So after declining my Peace Corps assignment, I flew down to New Zealand directly from a full season in French rugby, and then got into that, basically training with All Blacks and former All Blacks and professionals at a very high level. And, that was the hockey stick moment for me where it just started to climb. And all of a sudden, going from, really not knowing a whole lot about what I was doing to just investing into that process that we spoke about. And I was completely in love with it. I mean, how could you not be?
Mhm.
You're working on random jobs in rural New Zealand, and then, you're training part of the day and getting to travel around and play at a pretty good level of rugby. And it was an incredible experience. And, also falling in love with the people of New Zealand too. If you've ever had a chance to go down there, you'll know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, definitely make a intention in your life to get down there because it is amazing. But And then all of a sudden, I got a outreach from the U.S. national team, which really, for me, I couldn't really comprehend what was going on at that time because I was just traveling around having fun with a game that I had just discovered. And then all of a sudden it clicked that, hey, this is actually more serious. And this could be something that you do on a professional level, so then I went over to the Chula Vista Training Center, the Olympic Training Center in San Diego, and had a couple of camps, and then was fortunate enough to be selected over 20 times for appearances with the U.S. national team, and at a time as the captain of the U.S. team as well, and was able to appear in 2007 and 2011 Rugby World Cups while getting an agent and getting contracts and all these things where, it's funny when you come from Jerome, Idaho, and then people in Europe stop you and ask you for pictures and autographs, which I never got used to that, to be fair, Richard. It was a really wild thing to think about, but loved my time playing for Bath Rugby in England in the English Premiership and the French Top 14 for a time as well. And in 2011, the last pool game in the World Cup, the whistle blew and against Italy, and I just had a feeling in my heart that I had accomplished everything that I could ever accomplish in the game, and I was ready to come home to Idaho. So that's what I did.
Wow. So 2011, and the journey started in, was it '02? You said
Yeah,
2002.
2001 would have been my first game, and just had a handful of games in 2001 and 2002 before moving on to Australia.
And so 9 years later, after your
Yeah,
first game, or 10 years after your first game, you've gone and climbed the mountain, so to speak.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, and,
um,
and Richard, it's funny because people ask me about that journey sometimes, and I say there were far more moments to just say no and to pack it up and to go home because it was hard, whether that be financially or whether it be honestly, just missing family and friends and what was familiar. Or it was hard rugby too, right? You get bruised and banged up sometimes, and seasons are long, and you're out there in a you know 40 degrees and raining, and you're 80 minutes into something, and it's just it's not generally where most people want to be. It's kind of a trench, sometimes. So
yeah.
they can be really physically and mentally demanding situations, but uh, finding ways to say yes and trusting in that there's a greater process and there's a reason why you're feeling that suffering was really important to me. And thankfully, I didn't have to do that all by myself because I did have encouragement from people that were big supporters of me and my family and friends. So, but it is that journey where you can definitely say no. You don't have to subject yourself to a lot, especially in this life, Richard. I mean, here we are, it's 2024. We live in the most prosperous, abundant situation in human history. There's more money than there's ever been. There's more resources. There's more opportunity. And you can get very comfortable very quickly. But I can guarantee you in that journey of comfort and security that you don't get the same experience, and you're not going to end up in the same place as if you put yourself out there a little bit and suffer sometimes too. Because from my experience, suffering a little bit actually gives you more reward, to experience the good stuff in life too.
Yeah. So insightful. That's cool. So I want to, if it's okay, I want to take you back to that.
Anywhere you
That
want to go. I dropped a lot there in a
yeah,
little bit of time.
yeah. That's awesome. And I think it's awesome because then people kind of get the scope of where you went to in 10 minutes. And I don't think that really does it justice. But you've given some little nuggets here along the way where you talked about how you jumped on the plane, the one way ticket to Australia.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to just dive into what you were thinking, you know,
Yeah.
not when you made the decision, but, part way over, is there a moment on the plane ride where you're like, what am I doing? And then when you land in Sydney, or is it just, I'm all in and this is just whatever it takes?
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. I haven't thought about that specifically in a while. And I think that I was just so incredibly excited to go experience something outside of Idaho. And I was fortunate enough to have a mother who was unwavering in her support of me just trying life.
Hmm.
And so I never had that thought, you know.
Hmm.
I thought, hey, I found this incredibly cheap plane ticket and it has a free stopover in Fiji for 24 hours. And I'm gonna stay in the most inexpensive youth hostel possible. And going from Jerome to then all of a sudden standing on the beaches of Fiji, that's a pretty cool experience. And
Yeah.
you get to learn a lot about the world, and you get to appreciate where you come from a lot more when you get to see, the local people of Fiji and how they live. And in that same stretch, I also went to the Philippines on the way home, and I was able to do 24 hours in the Philippines and see how people live there as well. And man, just talk about irreplaceable experience, life experience, right? And that's pretty cool. But whether it was me hitchhiking or trains, planes, and automobiles trying to get up to Brisbane from Sydney, I never once said, I'm not really sure what's going on. I rented a car and it was on the wrong side of the car from what I'm used to, of course, driving on the other side of the road. And I was like, wow, this is different. And I got a $500 speeding ticket within 24 hours of me being there. All sorts of things happening, Richard. And, it's just wonderful to lean into life experience and seeing what happens and seeing who you meet. And yeah, I don't know why. I can't tell you why, Richard, but I never questioned myself in those
Hmm.
early years because it was so much fun. Now, that being said, when it got hard, certainly questioned myself, right? Because at that point in time, you start looking around and you look at, well, all my friends have this security. They have these
Hmm.
jobs that they've been investing into since they were out of high school or out of college, and they have all these things that from the outside looking in look attractive, right? But whenever I've talked to other friends of mine, they've always looked at my life and said, wow, what would have that been like to take some chances and take some opportunities that aren't exactly the norm, and being okay with reaching out there for something a little bit unique and different. And so I'm really glad that I was able to just say yes and be okay with that process, right? And I certainly did fall in love with the process. It was an amazing experience as a professional because from sun up to sundown, 7 days a week, I knew exactly where I was supposed to be, who I was supposed to be doing it with, and what to wear, what to eat, how to train, where the media appearance was going to be, what time the bus was leaving. I mean, it was a very regimented situation, living in a professional life, which served me incredibly well because transferring over into the business profession or even just having a family, how to approach things in a professional light, which is one of the most valuable things
Hmm.
that you could ever hope to get from experiences like that. Because um, showing up, surprisingly enough, is half the battle in life. And then you've heard the adage too: showing up is half of it, and showing out and performing is the other half. And that's something that I got from that whole process of being a professional in multiple countries and different competitions, and for the U.S. team as well. So anyway,
That's awesome. You, when you were telling the story, you spoke about, and I might be paraphrasing this not quite how you said it, but you talked about finding the reason, like in those hard moments where you just spoke about looking around. You start looking around at what friends are doing, and there could be something else. And do I really want to go home bumped and bruised after playing against these, all muscle, 200+ pound Polynesians? And
sure.
um, you talked about you have to find your reason for being there. I think that's how you put it. Is that right? What were some of yours? Some of the things that your go tos when you were there?
Um, I think understanding how much of a gift everything is at that point in time in that situation, right? I mean, being able to be in beautiful countries and playing a game that you love with people that, really support you. And, not only do you have your teammates that support you, but you have their families who support you and the community that supports you. And that was really great. Also, just knowing that my family had worked hard to provide a situation that afforded me to go and experience life, right? And this could be in different situations too, right? With different. I know that your listeners are going to think, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm not an athlete or I didn't play rugby. I didn't do these things, John. But nonetheless, like whether you're a parent or going to be a parent, I think that if there's one thing that you take away from listening to this, it's be supportive of your children and understanding that they're trying the best that they can with the tools and resources that they have. And I'll shout out Andrew Anderson because he uses that a lot. But they're doing the best that they can, and a little bit of support and opening a door for them where you didn't have to, but because you did, it can really change their life. And Richard, I can tell you that whether it be my mother or other key people in my life, like Carter, who I mentioned, who invited me to France the first time, I had so many people in my life that have opened up doors for me when they absolutely did not have to, but they took the time and the focus and the resources to open up a door. I had to walk through that door, Richard. I had to personally walk through it. It was my choice to do so, but I needed them to open the door. And once that was open, I always said yes. I always took the opportunity because I knew that there was going to be better things through that door, even though there was uncertainty about what it was going to be. I knew it was going to be better off because I would have rather picked the road that I didn't know the outcome with than the certainty. And being okay with uncertainty is very important. And Tony Robbins is somebody that I've always admired. He said, your level of success is directly correlated to the amount of adversity that you can handle. And that's a really big nugget. And I've always thought about that. So,
yeah, I love that. And where my mind goes when you talk about that going through that door or not, and certainty versus uncertainty, I ask the question, is anything really certain? Because things are changing all the time anyways. The difference is you get to choose the door. Whereas if you choose to stay and allow things to happen, then that's almost the more uncertain road because you're giving it up to chance. Even though it seems like I've been there before, and our brains are kind of conditioned to go down that road. I've been there before, so that's comfortable, and I want to stay here. Not always
Richard,
is that the case.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think that you find more out about yourself in situations of uncertainty. And that's a big thing. That's why people do endurance races or, Kevin Hall, he does that Colorado bike race, right? And, you look at other people, obviously social media is a great place to watch people do crazy things. But, I was just reading about a guy who left Sweden, I believe it was, on a bicycle and rode all the way to Nepal and, climbed the mountain unassisted in the Himalayan mountains and then rode the bicycle back. And I guarantee you that he found out a lot about himself through that process, but he certainly didn't have to. He didn't have to do that. He could have stayed home and, watched some Netflix, but he got to find out a little bit more about himself. And I certainly can remember specific times, being candid, Richard, I'd had some difficult games on occasion where it got harder than what I had ever experienced. And I, go back into the locker room and just start breaking down crying, right? Because you go through this, breakthroughs, and sometimes those include breakdowns for a split moment too. But, you weathered that moment, and, the next moment is a new moment. And
Mhm.
so that's what makes things fun is the humans have a crazy ability to be resilient if you allow it to happen.
So when you were in those professional levels, like, or um, some of the highest levels that you played at, did you ever get to a point where you felt like it was comfortable and you needed to push yourself to up your game, or was it always driven to have that have that growth?
No, I don't think I ever got too incredibly comfortable. And the reason why is because I didn't have a lot of advantage in that arena. So if you look at my time at Bath, really everybody that I was playing with was an incredible athlete, very big, very strong, very fast. And they also had a higher rugby IQ because all of those guys, whether they be from they were Polynesian, they were South African, they were Scottish, English, Irish, whoever. They were from around the world. Argentina, it was a very eclectic group of the highest skill level folks on that team. They'd been playing since they were walking, right? So I didn't have that advantage, but the only thing that I could control, which I'm a big advocate of focusing on what's in your control, was that I knew that I could work as hard as possible. Be willing to be uncomfortable for longer than somebody else. And that's a transferable skill too, Richard. If you're not happy with where you're at in your job, well, focusing on what's in your control is I'm going to be willing to do more than the other person. I'm going to be more professional. I'm going to, if I have to, I'm going to show up early and I'm going to stay late. I'm going to be more committed, right? I'm going to control my energy and how I'm showing up for my team better than anybody else. I'm going to study more. I'm going to know the material better than anybody. Like all of those things, those are things that you can focus on and what's in your control. And that's what I had to do. That's what I had to do because I didn't have the luxury of, coming from a rugby family and growing up playing with my dad and knowing the ins and outs and where to be and what to do in these situations. Like that was all pretty new for me, to be fair. Right? The whole experience of me learning about the word rugby and then retiring was basically 10 years.
Yeah. John, one thing I really love about your story is it kind of dispels the myth that you have to be born into it and grow up with it to be successful with it. And because you were 20 years old when you had played your first game
Mhm.
and started learning about it, and then you went and put in the work.
Right.
And I love that story. And you became the captain of the U.S. men's national rugby team. And I remember your story from before about playing against the Russian team,
Yeah.
and and I can't remember. I think you won. I think you guys won at the end. Is that right? And
Yeah. Well, there were people in the stadium that holding signs wearing spacesuits that said "We won the space race." So it was a very lively game in the World Cup. So yeah, it's a good time.
that's awesome. Uh, would you have, or do you have any advice for people on? Because you spoke a lot about choosing the, my words, choosing the road less traveled, choosing a place of discomfort so you can grow. Do you have any advice for people around taking that on and moving forward in their lives to grow?
Yeah, I think that you have to start out by spending time getting clear on what you want. So when you actually know where you want to go, then you can start reverse engineering how to get there. I honestly don't feel that people spend enough time on really getting clear on where they want to go because, folks, we can all agree that life happens pretty fast,
Mm-hmm.
right? This story that I'm telling you about rugby feels like it was just a couple years ago, and that I could probably go out there and play at the same level today. But that was a while ago now, right? That was half of my life ago, 20 years ago, where I started to play.
Yeah.
And, in 8 years, I'm going to be 50 years old, and I've got all of these wonderful kids and a beautiful wife, and things happen very quickly, and business happens very quickly too. And you have to stop and be disciplined enough to get very clear on, hey, when I'm 80 years old, when I'm 70, whatever number you want to pick, who do I want to be?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of themes do I want my life to be about? Who would I have wanted to impact? And what kind of experiences would I have wanted to experience? Because that's going to happen very fast. And I think one of the major things that people end up with in life in their older years is a lot of regret. And I believe that that's directly correlated to not investing themselves into clarity on what they want and why they want it. And then once you have that, then let's start building a roadmap. And when you have your roadmap, you can just be curious. There's not a right or a wrong answer if you know where you want to go and you're just willing to try. Because it's all kind of a hypothesis, right? There's not certainty. You can't say, okay, this is where I'm going to be, and this is exactly how it's going to go. That doesn't work. It doesn't work in entrepreneurialism. It doesn't work in trying to figure out the game of rugby. It doesn't work in life. It doesn't work in parenting, right? You think that it's going to be, well, this is the way it's going to go, and it ends up being, everyone's seen those sort of drawings, right? It's a roller coaster, folks, and you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with it not working the way that you thought it was going to go in a moment, in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year, right? But when you're resilient enough to continue to be like, okay, Jim Rohn says, isn't that interesting? There, something happened. Maybe it's not what you wanted to happen. Maybe it is, but you go, isn't that interesting? Take some curiosity towards it, and then figure out how you need to tack your sails a little bit, maybe adjust some things, and then move forward again. And then learn from that moment too. And then you start stacking those days up. Because Richard, you remember I talk about being consistent and persistent.
Mm-hmm.
You start stacking enough of those days up, then that starts to pay off. And although it some days seems like it was a step backwards, funny enough, it's still a differentiator in an angle of your trajectory. And when you stack those days up, those weeks, those months, those years, then 10 years later, like I experienced, I got to step off of the world stage. And that can also be applied towards business, towards your relationships at home with your family, your significant other, yourself, right? Your health, everything. But you've got to start stacking days up and being curious, taking notes, journaling, and saying, you know what, I'm committed to trying something else tomorrow. I'm going to do something new and see what happens. You know what? That didn't work. I wonder what else I could do. And then again, and repeat, because you're going to start getting rhythm in being uncomfortable, in doing new things, in being curious, and it's going to be a differentiator in life for you. And you're not going to have the regret that you would if you had not put yourself out there.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much, John, for your time today and the wisdom and the nuggets. If anyone wanted to reach out to you, is that something you'd be open to?
Of course, absolutely. Okay.
And
you want to put it in show notes, or what would be most helpful?
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes so that if you want to reach out to John or ask him a question, John, as far as I know him, and we've had a few interactions, he approaches his professional and his family life in a very similar way. Just has a lot of passion for life, and I admire that about you, and really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing some of this rich, deep wisdom with us to help us make our lives better and fall in love with life, fall in love with the process.
Fall in love with that process.
Yeah. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you.